Stranger Things Season 3 was released on the 4th of July in the year 2019. It came just 2 years after the mostly well-received second season of the show. However, as is often the case, a couple years truly felt like forever. Whether it's from the young actors aging up, the reinvention of the tone, or the writing style and scale shifting, the overarching feeling you'll likely receive from Stranger Things Season 3 is one of change. So, how do these changes affect the show in this season and for the future? Does the stark tonal shift benefit the season or detract from it? Does the core mystery continue to feel intriguing? And ultimately, why would I consider Stranger Things Season 3 something of a disappointment? In this video, I'll answer those questions as we take a deep dive into the third season of Stranger Things. Firstly, by categorically critiquing the various aspects of the season, before detailing the plot through each individual storyline, and finally giving my closing thoughts. With that set and out of the way, let's dive right in. What better way to start than by discussing some of the most noticeable changes present in Stranger Things Season 3. Firstly, the tone. Where Seasons 1 and 2 thrived with their grounded, horror-based mysteries, Season 3 takes a different path. The tone of the season is overall brighter, happier, and louder. This isn't necessarily a problem, and at times it actually works really well, allowing us to see a different side of the main characters. What is a problem, however, is the tonal inconsistencies within the episodes themselves. Our plotlines in this season are very distinct, mostly because of the tone. Some plotlines like Nancy and Jonathan or Ellen Max can be legitimately scary and thrilling when investigating the Mind Flayer control and body horror involved with the Mind Flayer. But some plotlines like the teens at the mall are mostly comedic. Jumping back and forth between these starkly different tones in our plotlines can be really jarring, especially as the season progresses farther along. This discussion of the tone brings me to examine the overall scope of the show as a whole. The growing scope is an aspect of the season I'm certainly mixed on. Like I said, Stranger Things Season 3 is all about change, and part of that comes from this season's role in moving the show forward. What I mean by that is that Seasons 1 and 2 remain mostly grounded. Besides the supernatural mystery, the show retains its small town feel. Seasons 4 and 5, on the other hand, are the huge global stakes level adventures. So naturally, the onus falls on Season 3 to bridge those two concepts. You can actively feel the writers trying to expand the scope with this season. Not only has a new mall opened in town, which is pretty awesome by the way, but Russians have moved in as well. Overall, you just get the feeling that the town is a lot bigger now. This shift in tone and scale ultimately allows for increased spectacle, but it reduces the intimacy of the stakes. The days where it was just our little group of characters trying to navigate a complex other world are all but gone. The last thing I want to touch on with this section, which has declined noticeably since Season 1, is how Stranger Things appeals to the 80s nostalgia the show has always been known for. In Seasons 1 and 2, the world felt lived in. It was undoubtedly set in the 80s, but importantly, it didn't feel shoved in your face. Slight references and the mannerisms of our characters helped communicate the feeling in a more natural way. Now, however, in Season 3, it just feels more forced. They are shoving the 80s in your face. The mall is great, yes, and it shows the production value of the show as well. That's not really where our problems lie though. Overt references like the literal Terminator being present and Lucas's legitimate 45-second speech about New Coke feel so forced. Not only do these fail to give me that great sense of 80s feel and nostalgia for simpler times, they ruin the immersion and take me out of the episodes, replacing smart references with "hey look, I know that" moments. While Seasons 1 and 2 shined in their tone, scope, and world building, Season 3 is a lot more mixed for me. Some things worked, some things really didn't. Season 1's mystery managed to stay remarkably focused on its one central goal, and despite its faults, Season 2 also had a compelling mystery. Like everything else though, Season 3's mystery is a far cry from the Stranger Things status quo thus far. Not only is the mystery unfocused, but the genre of the show shifts to the point where I don't know if I can consider the season to be a mystery at all. Let's start with the basics. In order for a mystery to work, there needs to be an unknown, something we, along with the characters, will work to discover. In Season 1, it's finding what happened to Will, and in Season 2, it's quite similar, finding out what's happening to Will. Season 3 does have an unknown, but only partially. One of the largest storytelling faults of this season is how unfocused it is, and that's seen here with how the different plotlines are exploring mostly separate mysteries altogether. Here's what I mean. The storyline, which does have some sort of mystery, is with the kids and the Mind Flayer. We need to learn what is happening to Billy and eventually use him to learn more about what danger the Mind Flayer poses to the people in the town. This manages to be pretty intriguing and drive the plot forward. Where the kids' mystery works, however, the teens and adults' mystery involving the Russians really doesn't. The issue arises at the very beginning of the very first episode, which literally shows us the Russians opening the gate. Just like that, most of the mystery for those two entire plot lines is already discovered. We already know there are Russians and Hawkins accessing the Upside Down, and therefore there is no unknown. To the characters there is, but not us, making both of these storylines mostly lacking in any real compelling mystery. Even though one plotline has a better base to build from in developing its mystery, all of this season's plotlines make a critical failure in execution, which is notable all over the season. This failure comes in the form of the convenient coincidences the writers use to push the plot forward. The first seasons of the show saw the characters work hard and piece together clues to discover information. It was satisfying and provided a slow build-up to eventually satisfying discoveries. In each and every one of our Season 3 plotlines, our characters aren't called to action or working to discover things at all. Instead, the writers have them accidentally stumble upon things that need investigating. Consider this, the Mall Kids plotline with the Russian base only starts because Dustin happens to accidentally intercept a Russian frequency when trying to contact Susie near the beginning of the season. Not only is this concept a little far-fetched and unbelievable, but it's lazy writing. This is seen again with Eleven and Max discovering something is up with Billy. The only reason our characters are clued into the Billy storyline is because Max and Eleven randomly happened to spy on him when he was obviously under the influence of the Mind Flayer. Plot conveniences like this, combined with scattered plot lines and a lack of true unknowns, make this season's mystery feel low stakes and ultimately disappointing. The episodes don't flow as well, and the characters lose true agency in pushing the plot forward, and that is disappointing. If anything at all, Season 3 only proved further that the true core of Stranger Things is with its characters. As a whole this season, the character arcs and moments continue to be extremely rewarding, just as they were in Seasons 1 and 2. This season marks an important shift for a lot of our characters, however, as a serious overarching message this season is about growing up. So let's go through and see how the characterization works and where it might happen to be lacking within this season. A couple character dynamics are explored very well this season, which I definitely want to touch on. Firstly, Steve and our newest character Robin really shine. Not only do they play well off of each other and really help reveal Robin's personality, but this dynamic plays perfectly into the growing up idea I was mentioning before, mainly for Steve. In Seasons 1 and 2, Steve got all the ladies, but now he isn't in high school anymore. He just works at the ice cream shop and therefore kinda struggles to pick up girls. He's not as much of a cool guy anymore. In this season, we watch him adjust to that reality and eventually take a liking to Robin, who he genuinely likes to be around and doesn't just like her for her popularity. However, Steve grows up even more after finding out Robin isn't even straight. Overall, this is one of the best dynamics of the season. The next two dynamics both involve Eleven. Firstly, a slightly more disappointing dynamic between Eleven and Mike. This season attempts to really put them through some difficulties and strain in their relationship, but that ultimately is underdeveloped. They break up pretty early in the season and get back together later without much struggle. It's not horrible and their relationship is still charming, but that separation definitely could have been explored more. Next, we have easily the best character dynamic, and that's between Elle and Max. It's criminal that up to this point, our number one main character Eleven has barely even interacted with any female characters besides Joyce for a couple lines and Kali for one episode in Season 2. This season remedies that though, and makes the clear layup by pairing our two main girls, Elle and Max. Their dynamic in the early half of the season is super fun to watch and provides tons of characterization for both characters. Let's finish up with just a couple more brief mentions. Firstly, Will. After being captured and possessed in the first two seasons, this is his first real chance to operate on his own. The writers obviously see that and make an attempt to give him some characterization. Will's clinging on to the past while his friends have moved on works exceptionally well. However, this is only really explored for the first half of the season. After around the midpoint, this plotline is mostly dropped and ends up ignored, which does really suck. Next, we have a couple mostly stagnant characters to touch on. Firstly, Nancy and Jonathan, who just like season 2 are pretty much left alone this season. It really does suck, but with no attempt at characterization, the attachment I have from them from season 1 just gets less and less as the show continues. They do attempt characterization for Nancy in the very beginning of the season with her job at the newspaper, but this is shut down and ignored pretty quick, similar to Will's characterization but even earlier. Next we have the adults. Firstly Joyce, who, just as she has been, remains about the same. This time her son Will isn't the one directly endangered by our mystery, and I think you can feel that the writers really just had to figure out how to throw her in to keep her involved. This leads her to discovering the magnets falling down, which is one of those characters just stumble upon mystery that needs investigating moments I mentioned earlier. Lastly, we have Hopper, who is the biggest disappointment for this season. He isn't just left alone, but the writers actually regress his character. This sucks especially bad because his eventual death feels so much less impactful because of this regression. Seasons 1 and 2 saw him go from an unmotivated, directionless adult to a stoic detective who takes on the responsibility of raising 11. This season, however, sees him go all the way back to being silly, annoying, and sometimes kind of insane. It really sucks. All I will say, however, is the development of Hopper and Joyce's romance I thought worked really well and managed to carry a lot of their scenes together. Overall, Stranger Things still manages to have an incredibly endearing cast of characters who play well off each other. Even though not all of them get characterization, they remain well realized and help carry the season to being still a good season of television, even if it's not quite as good as the first 2 seasons that came before. Lastly, let's discuss the pacing in Stranger Things Season 3, which is a complete departure from both Seasons 1 and 2 in nearly every aspect. While the new style works on the surface, I found it to be unsatisfying as a whole. The shift in pacing and overall writing style is meant to help ease in the changing tone of the season. Previous seasons focused on mystery and thrill, and therefore spent more time setting things up and slowly building the story for a big payoff. This season is the opposite. It's an upbeat adventure with slight horror aspects just thrown in. This new tone sees the abandonment of meticulous setup for instead constant payoff and rapidly moving plotlines. In previous seasons, each plotline's investigations were slightly connected. Reveals in one plotline often gave important context to another and vice versa. This allowed the episodes to have great cliffhangers and let the plotlines grow with each other and alongside the central mystery as the season went forward. Here, the core plotlines are almost entirely disconnected from one another. Each one is discovering huge new bits of information that only pertains to that specific plotline, and this brings up the issue of cliffhangers, which Season 3's episodes almost entirely lack. The effect of all this on a season-wide level is that the pacing in each individual episode is much more rapid. From the very beginning of the season, we are thrown into our different adventures. However, this makes the eventual payoffs much more disappointing, ultimately damaging the impact of this season's overall story. It's funny, because the best portions of this season are the rare occurrences where the story slows down. The last 15 minutes of the finale managed to be some of the most satisfying and emotional moments the show has seen yet. This, along with the character-focused moments, proves that Stranger Things is at its best when it takes its time to develop its ideas, something Stranger Things Season 3 mostly fails to do. With the general critique of the season out of the way, let's dive into the content itself. Like I've explained, Seasons 1 and 2 were mostly connected in their various plot lines, but here in Season 3, each one kinda strays out on its own. So instead of going episode by episode, I'll just trace each individual plot line leading up to the finale. As we've discussed, Joyce and Hopper have the weakest plotline by a solid bit this season. Not only is there no character growth for Joyce, but there's straight regression from Hopper. Some side characters make the plotline somewhat memorable, however. One clear issue is the plotline as a whole follows Hopper and Joyce investigating the Russians, but the Scoop Troop, Dustin, Steve, Robin, and Erica at the mall, proves to simply be the better plotline focusing on the Russians in this season. We pick up after the end of Season 2, first seeing Hopper interacting with Joyce as he's having issues with Eleven and Mike's growing relationship, all taking place in his house. I actually found this short segment pretty interesting and sometimes quite comedic. The plotline really starts, however, with one of the worst coincidence-inciting incidents of the season. Nothing pulls the plotline into our main plot with urgency. Instead, Joyce happens to discover the falling magnets and decides to go investigate. Not really that interesting. It's pretty convenient, especially when compared to Season 1 and 2 where danger was directly present, and that is what set our characters onto an investigation. From here, we have some stereotypical 80s relationship tropes between Hopper and Joyce as they head out to begin their investigation. First, heading to the lab where they believe the energy field messing with the magnets is coming from. They encounter Krugori, also known as the Terminator, which again feels cheap. This transforms the plotline into more of a road movie action type deal. Hopper, Joyce, Murray, and Alexei, the lovable Russian scientist who Hopper and Joyce just captured from the lab, are all off to investigate the Russians. With Alexei on their side, Hopper and Joyce are clued into information us, the audience, are already aware of. The Russians are building a machine under the mall intended to get back into the Upside Down, setting up their eventual meeting with the kids and Scoop Troop. Realizing the kids are in danger, the gang heads to the Hawkins Fair with the Russians hot on their trail. At the fair, the Terminator arrives and kills Alexei, which really was a sad moment. Alexei didn't get a lot of time to shine, but he was really lovable and charming in the few episodes, and for him to die in such an unfortunate and unceremonious way was pretty sad. From here, we get a decent action chase scene as Hopper escapes the Russians around the fun fair before being picked up by Joyce and Murray to rush to the mall to meet with the kids. The end of episode 7 sees them finally head to the mall to meet with the kids, setting up the finale. As I have said, this goose hunt of a plotline is one of the least interesting in the season. Not only is the action chase stuff kind of a tonal shift, but the plotline feels like it gets less done than the other plotlines, but with more screen time. A lot of it feels like filler. However, despite regression, our characters, especially Murray and Alexei, are still well realized and interesting to watch, bringing many funny moments. So, is the plotline truly bad? No, but does it portray a lot of the biggest weaknesses present as a whole in Season 3? Yes, absolutely. Next, let's move forward with the kids in these first couple episodes of the season. This isn't really a main plotline with one through line until the midpoint in the season. Instead, there's a lot of random stuff happening at once, but it's interesting and often important character work for many of our most key characters, so it's certainly worth taking a look at. The season begins with some of the most interesting and important character work, updating us on where we are with our characters after the events of Season 2. Eleven and Mike, older now, have a much more intimate relationship. It's funny at times and quickly causes tension with the aforementioned Hopper, who goes to Joyce for some real parenting advice. This little plot thread is pretty fun to watch and a solid reintroduction to many of our characters this season. That thread interacts with other threads though, with one of those being Will, who, like I talked about in the characterization section, has some interesting attempts at character work here which worked for me, but weren't entirely paid off as the season went along. So, we pick up after Season 2 with Will finally being somewhat normal in the group. Seasons 1 and 2 saw Will be the one directly affected by the danger and therefore lacking any meaningful characterization with the rest of the group. By now though, our kids are older. Relationship antics plague the group for everyone except Will, who just wants to play Dungeons and Dragons like the old times. This plotline progresses and results in a pretty emotional and sad scene. Will dresses up like a wizard for D&D, but is left to hang again, and in a moment of anger and rage, he runs off into the forest and destroys Castle Byers. It's a really sad scene and shows the inner conflict within Will trying to hang onto his childhood innocence in a rapidly changing world. This plotline also sees our first step towards the kids getting involved with the Mind Flayer mystery as Will feels the chill on his neck, which signals the Mind Flayer's return. Next, we'll move on to the best part of this early kid story, which combines both important mystery with characterization. Following Elle's dumping of Mike, we see the aforementioned bond between her and Max, which really is fun to watch, and the two characters have amazing chemistry. During a sleepover, however, and in quite a tense scene, Elle spies on Billy and finds him attacking Heather, cluing them into the mystery. A mini goose hunt follows, leading Max and Elle to meeting with the main boys at the pool to investigate Billy. Here in episode 4, the sauna test, we get our most visceral look at the flayed Billy yet, when the kids trap him in the sauna and he gains superhuman strength, breaks out, and nearly kills 11 before the kids barely manage to escape. This is a well-directed, intense few scenes and set all the kids up to investigate the mystery. This first leads them to the teens. Speaking of the teens, let's trace what they have been doing leading up to this point next. The teens' plotline picks up with a new development in Nancy and Jonathan's lives. This actually might be their best plotline since season 1. I'm not fully sure, but this early portion is at least pretty solid with some attempted setups and very important information to the central mystery. This development sees Nancy and Jonathan working as interns at the Hawkins Post. The setup with Nancy begins quickly as the male executives at the Post are obviously sexist and doubt Nancy is not capable. This is an interesting plotline, but the core issue comes from it being irrelevant. We, the audience, already know Nancy is more than capable, so seeing the editors at the Post insult her for not being capable is less interesting and more maddening in a mostly unsatisfying way. This irrelevance, combined with a lack of real payoff down the road, make this seem like a real waste of time in retrospect. Their work leads Nancy to go out of her way to try to prove herself at the Post, heading out to the kind elderly woman Miss O'Driscoll's house to investigate some rabid rats who are eating fertilizer. This plotline gives us the first biggest clue as to the mystery surrounding the Mind Flayer this season, when Jonathan finds the rat who explodes into the goo in the cage, the season's first little taste of body horror and a huge hint for the future. Following this, we do see a little conflict arise between Nancy and Jonathan after they were inevitably fired from their jobs, which ultimately leads the teens to meeting with the kids in the basement, teeing up a huge plotline for the rest of the season to follow. The best moments in seasons 1 and 2 were when our plotlines, who were all investigating the same central mystery, met up and revealed to the others all of each other's discoveries. Those moments provided the immense satisfaction and payoff of the seasons prior. As we can see, almost every plotline in season 3 isn't investigating the same mystery, so those moments are nearly non-existent. However, the one time that feeling is present is here, when Nancy and Jonathan meet up with the kids who have both been investigating the Mind Flayer. After meeting at Will's house and getting those satisfying moments, the group heads to the hospital so Nancy and Jonathan can check on Miss O'Driscoll. Here, we get one of the scariest and most intense sequences of the season and honestly, the show thus far. Previously, the horror and thrill came from unease and slow building tension. Here, however, it is straight slasher horror. In the hospital, Nancy and Jonathan are attacked and overwhelmed by the Flayed, who, after barely being defeated, melt into fleshy goop to create a small monster, as we know, the physical manifestation of the Mind Flayer in the real world. Nancy and Jonathan are barely saved by 11. This scene really raises the tension and stakes and feels intense without feeling overly silly. With the danger truly established, the group heads out to investigate the Mind Flayer and attempt to stop it. One of the best parts of this storyline is really seeing Nancy and Jonathan get integrated with the kids. Since season 1, the interactions between most of these characters have been pretty thin, and here we see so much of it, and it's really great. To investigate, 11 uses her powers to again spy on the flayed Billy. This gives us some huge reveals about Billy's past in California, and really begins to portray his fall into cruelty as a real tragedy. It really helps us to empathize with him, all to build up to his eventual sacrifice in the finale. 11's efforts end in success. They know the source of the Mind Flayer is the Brimborn Steelworks building. This information comes at a cost, however, as the Mind Flayer is fully aware of the group's location. Barreling towards the finale, we get an intense but also disappointing scene when the Mind Flayer attacks the kids at the cabin. This is one of the biggest ways the show has lost its small town feeling. The kids are being attacked in the middle of a forest by a ginormous Godzilla-like flesh monster, and they somehow all survive. The writers really just begin to require some suspension of disbelief to be invested in these unimaginable scenes. Think about this. Somehow, one single Demogorgon in Season 1 was way scarier and more intense than a huge 30-foot flesh monster in Season 3. The genre, tone, and writing shift couldn't be more clear than at this point. With Eleven's help, the kids manage to escape the cabin and head to the mall to help Elle, whose leg was hurt in the fight, and subsequently meet with Dustin, finally converging our plot lines. The teens and kids' plot lines are ultimately mixed. Some great aspects and characterization dotted around, but a slightly unfocused plot at times and jarring tonal and scale shifts make this whole Mind Flayer plot feel like total whiplash. But now that we've covered the adults, teens, and kids leading up to episode 8, let's see what Dustin, Steve, Robin, and Erica, the Scoop Troop, have been doing. So, the final piece of the Season 3 puzzle before diving into the finale. So far, we had the teens and kids dealing with the Mind Flayer, and the adults on their goose hunt investigating the Russians. The adults' plotline fails to be intriguing, however, because the Scoop Troop plotline also investigates the Russians, except much more up close and personal, making it much more intriguing and also providing a surprisingly stark tonal jump from what you would expect. The characters in this plotline pick up well after the end of Season 3. Some time has passed, but they're still living their lives somewhat the same. Dustin was off at summer camp where he met his new girlfriend, Susie, and fresh out of high school Steve has picked up a new job at an ice cream shop called Scoops Ahoy at the Starcourt Mall, with his co-worker being the season's new main character, Robin. The plotline instantly is kind of hard to believe with how it just begins. With Dustin trying to contact Susie over a long-distance radio, he somehow picks up a Russian coded transmission instead. This inciting incident really exposes so many of the writing problems here. Firstly, it's unbelievable. No way would Russians in the height of the Cold War be transmitting a message so publicly like that and not get caught. And even worse, if they are deep underground, how in the world is the music from a ride in the mall being picked up? Putting all this aside, this inciting incident is also probably the worst example of the characters just stumbling upon things. Nothing calls them to action like previous seasons. They're just interested in this thing Dustin happened to find and investigate. But seriously, let me repeat this again. The entire starting point for one of our major plot lines is Dustin accidentally picking up a Russian transmission. After doing some investigations with the group and making a couple translating and music locating breakthroughs, our characters discover a Russian storage room they need to break inside. This leads Dustin, Steve, and Robin to recruit Lucas's pretty comedic little sister Erica to help out. Erica was just a side character in seasons 1 and 2, but she always was pretty funny, and so a bigger role for her here is certainly welcome. With Erica's help, the gang enters the storage room, but this actually turns out to be a massive elevator transporting them to the Russian base under the Starcourt Mall. Yeah, at this point in the plotline, any ounce of small town feeling is gone. We have gone fully off the edge. Nonetheless, the plot presses forward. The gang explores the underground base. Some great gags and character moments come up as they explore, but eventually, Steve and Robin are captured and interrogated. Despite the wild nature of these events, keep in mind it's all still being treated as one big joke. The plotline is nothing near serious, which shouldn't make much sense when you consider how tense the plotline should be. Yet, the jokes still land because our characters are just so lovable. Dustin and Erica managed to break the hilariously drugged Steve and Robin out, and in the most unbelievable Obi-Wan Kenobi show Leia chase sequence moment, if you know what I mean, 4 kids somehow managed to escape a full-on Soviet prison during the Cold War. Once up top, we get another one of the season's look, it's from the 80s moments when the gang watches Back to the Future. The episode even uses literal pieces of score from the original movie as its own. It is a perfect example of the 80s feeling getting lazier, but it's also Back to the Future, potentially my favorite movie ever made, so it gets a pass just this once. This brings us to episode 7 with just a couple more moments before our 3 plotlines converge. The main one being the excellently acted scene with Steve and Robin, who have great chemistry and have been set up all season to end up getting together. The show provides a pretty great subversion, however, when it turns out Robin is actually gay, and seeing Steve's reaction not to be sad but instead be honest and happy is actually a pretty heartwarming and enjoyable moment, further proving that no matter what, the heart and soul of Stranger Things, its characters, remain well realized. Somehow, despite the presence of the Terminator or a ginormous flesh monster, this plotline is still the silliest, most unbelievably ungrounded plotline of the season. It requires you to suspend your disbelief basically the entire time to take it seriously. But the characters have such amazing chemistry and remain so strong that the plotline and its humor end up somewhat working for me. This plotline perfectly represents both the strengths and weaknesses of Season 3 of Stranger Things. Finally, however, this plotline wraps up when, right before the group is captured, 11, the other kids, and the teens show up to save the day, uniting our plotlines and sending us barreling into the 70-minute long finale where every separate plotline we have been following throughout the season will finally be resolved. So now that we've traced the adults, kids, teens, and mall group plotlines throughout the season, let's dive into the finale and see how it manages to conclude all of these separate arcs and plotlines. As we've previously discussed, the disconnected nature of the season as a whole means there isn't really much important information for each different plotline to share with each other. However, this finale as a whole proves to be successful as the main objective is mostly clear and the writers manage to make each plotline dependent on the others for the final mission to succeed, all while the pacing rides incredibly high throughout. This plotline feels more like the final act of a movie than anything Stranger Things has done before. Nonetheless, after 11 overexerts her powers to remove the Mind Flayer, our characters do briefly meet. We get a couple funny character moments between the plotlines as the group makes the plan to defeat the Mind Flayer. Joyce, Hopper, and Murray will descend into the Russian base to close the gate, and the Scoop Troop will give directions using Dustin's long-range radio Cerebro, and the rest of the kids must survive the Mind Flayer, who is now ginormous, and his attack, until the adults successfully close the gate. Right as the adults head out to descend into the base, we get a couple nice character moments between Hopper and 11 and Hopper and Mike. We also see a nice moment with the 4 main boys, further addressing their unfortunate split throughout the season. The adults head down into the base, slipping by Russians and sneaking through the vents. They are guided by the Scoop Troop, who have reached Dustin's Cerebro device at the top of the hill. Meanwhile, things aren't going so good for Nancy, Jonathan, and the kids back at the mall. After the rest of them left, Billy found them, and therefore so does the Mind Flayer. Without any help from 11's powers, the kids need to escape. The group is split up. First, 11, Mike, and Max attempt to escape through a back entrance. The other kids distract the Mind Flayer, but Billy manages to catch them. Max desperately tries to remind Billy of past memories and take him out of the Mind Flayer's control, but to no avail. Billy's immense power overwhelms the kids and he captures them. Earlier, after distracting the Mind Flayer, the rest of the group escapes outside and into their car. The car isn't starting, and Billy is about to hit them in his own car. It looks like doom for a large majority of our cast, but right in the nick of time, Steve rams his car into Billy's, saving the group, who manage to escape. The adults continue their descent into the base. They need it to open a safe to access the keys needed to shut down the machine and close the portal. The code is Planck's constant, but Alexi's code doesn't work. In a funny callback, Dustin quickly switches his radio to contact Susie, who knows the number. The actual means to get the number, however, I'm a lot more iffy on. Susie doesn't realize the stakes of the situation and is mad that Dustin hasn't called her for a week. The only way to get the code is if Dustin will sing Never Ending Story with her, which he does. This moment is interesting. Overall, I don't hate it because it is really fun and brings some lightheartedness into the episode when it definitely needed it. However, singing in the middle of the finale really does symbolize the departure from the methodical, slow burn, tension-filled feeling the show used to bring. The adults use the code to unlock the safe, and tension in all plotlines is rising to a head. The Mind Flayer is returning to kill 11 and the other kids, but the rest of the kids' group shoots Lucas's fireworks at it to hold it off. They run out of fireworks, however, and it seems like Eleven's fate is sealed. Right before the Mind Flayer kills her, Eleven makes one last attempt to save Billy. Out of any character besides Max, Eleven saw the most of Billy throughout the season. She dove into his childhood in the past and saw how his life led him to today. So Eleven reminds Billy of his mother, and it ends up working. In one last heroic moment, the bully kid Billy redeems himself. He sacrifices himself to hold back the Mind Flayer and save Eleven. Right after that, in the underground, the adults are about to turn off the gate, but they are attacked by the Terminator once again. Him and Hopper fight brutally, and Hopper gets the upper hand, killing the Terminator. But now, Hopper is trapped outside the safe room and Joyce needs to close the gate. First, we watched Billy die, and now, seemingly, we watched one of the show's most integral characters, Hopper, give his life as well. The conflict is solved, and in the immediate aftermath, we get a lot of amazing moments. Max is distraught after watching her brother die in front of her. Joyce and Murray flee the underground base after watching Hopper's sacrifice, and the military, along with returning Dr. Owens, arrives at the Hawkins Mall. Finally, Joyce sees Eleven, who, in that moment, realizes Hopper is dead. At the time, the saddest and the most emotional moment of the show thus far. Just like Season 2, the epilogue, taking place 3 months later in the last 15 or so minutes of the episode, is easily the best part of the entire season. After a rough season, Season 3's epilogue might be the best one yet, or at least the most important. We send off a couple characters. Hopper is celebrated as a national hero, and Steve and Robin get a job at the video store together. We then cut to our main group of characters, the Byers family. Joyce, Jonathan, and Will, along with Eleven, are packing up to move out to California. We wrap up a majority of our characters this season. Lucas and Max are teasing Dustin, Will donates his D&D board, Nancy and Jonathan say goodbye, and finally, Eleven and Max say goodbye. The last portion of the season is the most emotional and hammers home all at once the theme of growing up and change that works so well this season. In a callback from the beginning of the season, Eleven finds Hopper's note and reads it, with Hopper voicing it. We get the final montage of the Byers leaving. It's a sad moment and the realest, most physical example of change. A huge chunk of our characters don't even live in Hawkins anymore, and two important characters, Billy and Hopper, are gone. As Hopper reads the letter and each character goes their own way, the writers pull at every viewer's heartstring with a truly universal theme that relates to each and every one of us. Hopper says it best himself. He writes, "I know you're getting older, growing, changing, and I guess, if I'm really being honest, that's what scares me. I don't want things to change, so I think maybe that's why I came in here, to try and stop that change, to turn back the clock, to make things go back to how they were. But I know that's naive. It's just not how life works. It's moving, always moving, whether you like it or not. And yeah, sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's sad, and sometimes it's surprising." And with that, to David Bowie's Heroes playing in the background, Joyce shuts the door on the empty Byers house. The place where so many important events have happened so far is empty and vacant. And with that, the screen cuts to black, marking the end of Stranger Things Season 3. After a long season, this finale really hammers home my main point, that being change. Our characters have moved, and Stranger Things as a show is set to shift dramatically leading into Season 4. This season, unlike any other, shifts many of the core aspects of Stranger Things. The season has always been described as the summer blockbuster season, and that's funny because this season feels like one long movie rather than a season of TV. That brings positives and it brings negatives. The slow burn tone and small town feeling are all but removed, but the energy and pacing are at an all-time high. However, with the changes, the one thing which manages to stay mostly the same are our characters. Despite moves, losses, and relationships being left behind, the core of Stranger Things, its characters, remain compelling, well-realized, and heartfelt. This means that no matter what, as long as our characters remain strong, there will always be enjoyment to find in Stranger Things. The last thing to quickly discuss is Hopper's fate. As we see in the post-credit scene, he's not really dead. I'm conflicted on this. Hopper was one of the show's most integral and well-realized characters, so of course, as a viewer, I don't want him to die. However, I think the show would have been better had he been kept dead. It would raise the stakes for future seasons and ensure the emotional ending of this season remains completely true. Bringing him back has potential to undermine the themes and emotions established with the end of Season 3. But whether he's back or not, everything is different now, and seeing how the writers move forward into Seasons 4 and 5 will be extremely interesting. So, with its new themes and shift in style, there's naturally a lot to talk about when it comes to Stranger Things Season 3. Did you agree with any of my thoughts or critiques on the characters, writing, or overall plot progression of the season? Has this video helped fully illustrate this season's theme of change to you? Or do you find my comments and critiques still unconvincing? Let me know your thoughts and opinions down below. With all that being said, I really hope you enjoyed this video, and with that, I will see you all later.